Before the first Allied tank rolled into Paris, explosives were already wired beneath its bridges. Orders had been issued from Berlin. If the city could not be held, it would be erased. The monuments, the cathedrals, the river crossings, all prepared for demolition. Paris stood on the edge of liberation and annihilation. The question was no longer whether Germany would lose the war. The question was whether Paris would survive it. August 1944. Paris was exhausted, hungry, and suspended in a fragile silence. For 4 long years, the city had lived under German occupation. Since June 1940, when French defenses collapsed and German troops marched through the capital, the heart of France had been forced into submission. Swastika banners hung over historic buildings. German patrols moved through boulevards once filled with artists, writers, and tourists. Cafes remained open, but conversations were cautious. Laughter was quieter. The city of light had not gone dark, but it lived in shadow. Occupation reshaped every aspect of daily life. Food was rationed to survival levels. Coal shortages made winters brutal. Electricity cuts were frequent. Newspapers printed what censors approved. Jewish families were identified, isolated, deported. Some Parisians collaborated for profit or protection. Others adapted in silence, focused only on survival, and beneath it all, resistance networks grew. The French resistance was never a single unified force. It was fragmented, decentralized, sometimes divided by ideology. But it existed everywhere, in railway yards, in police stations, in printing basements, in whispered meetings behind closed shutters. They passed intelligence to London. They sabotaged transport lines. They printed underground newspapers that reminded citizens that France had not disappeared. For 4 years, Paris waited, and waiting in wartime is its own form of endurance. The momentum for change did not begin inside the city. It began on the beaches of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history. The objective was not symbolism, it was destruction, the destruction of German military power in Western Europe. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his planners were focused on mobility, logistics, and encirclement. Cities were obstacles. They required food, fuel, manpower, and security. Paris, with over 2 million civilians, represented a logistical burden the Allies were reluctant to assume too soon. The initial plan was clear: bypass Paris, encircle German forces, push east, break the Wehrmacht before it could reorganize, let the capital fall naturally once the German army withdrew. From a strictly military perspective, it made sense. Urban warfare consumes resources and time. Supplying a massive civilian population strains fragile lines. In war, efficiency often overrides emotion. But wars are not fought on maps alone. They unfold in human environments, shaped by politics and perception. By mid-August 1944, the German front in Normandy had begun to collapse under Allied pressure. Divisions retreated in disorder. The speed of the Allied advance surprised even its planners. Inside Paris, hope surged, and hope is volatile. On August 19th, the city ignited. Police units went on strike. Railway workers halted operations. Resistance fighters erected barricades in the streets, recalling revolutions from earlier centuries. Gunfire echoed across neighborhoods that had endured occupation in tense restraint. German forces still present in the city responded with force. Skirmishes intensified. The insurrection was courageous, but dangerously premature. If Allied troops did not enter quickly, the uprising risked being crushed. Civilian casualties could skyrocket. Entire districts could face destruction. The window between symbolic revolt and catastrophic retaliation was narrow, and layered atop the military urgency was a political storm. The resistance contained powerful communist factions who had earned legitimacy through underground struggle. At the same time, General Charles de Gaulle, leading the Free French from exile, sought to restore a centralized French authority. If Paris were liberated internally, without strong coordination from de Gaulle's forces, the balance of power inside France might shift unpredictably. Liberation was not just about removing Germans, it was about defining who governed afterward. De Gaulle understood this with clarity. If American troops liberated Paris alone, France risked appearing dependent, even diminished. If communist elements dominated the uprising, the political future of the nation could tilt dramatically in the emerging post-war order. De Gaulle needed French forces, visibly French forces, to enter the capital. The liberation had to reinforce sovereignty, not undermine it. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Adolf Hitler responded with rigidity. He viewed Paris not as a cultural treasure, but as a strategic possession to be denied if lost. Orders were issued. If German forces could not hold the city, they were to destroy it. Bridges over the Seine were mined. Key infrastructure was prepared for demolition. Historic landmarks stood within range of devastation. The military governor of Paris, General Dietrich von Choltitz, received instructions that left little room for interpretation. The possibility was real. Paris could burn. As resistance fighting intensified and intelligence reports highlighted instability, pressure mounted on Allied command. Eisenhower faced a dilemma. Diverting forces to Paris could strain supply lines already stretched thin. Fuel shortages were emerging as a serious concern, yet ignoring the city might trigger chaos, destruction, or a political vacuum. Strategy confronted reality, and reality demanded adjustment. Eisenhower authorized the advance. The French 2nd Armored Division, under General Philippe Leclerc, was directed toward Paris, supported by American units. The movement carried military, symbolic, and political weight. It signaled recognition that the liberation of a capital cannot be reduced to logistical math. On the night of August 24, 1944, French armored vehicles entered the outskirts of Paris. Civilians flooded the streets despite sporadic gunfire. Church bells rang across neighborhoods. Hidden tricolor flags emerged from windows. Fighting continued in isolated pockets, but German coordination was collapsing. Resistance fighters linked up with advancing Allied forces. Momentum shifted irreversibly. On August 25th, General von Choltitz made his decision. He did not execute the destruction orders. The reasons remain debated: pragmatism, calculation, or recognition of futility. What is certain is that the bridges were not detonated. The city's core survived. Paris was surrendered largely intact. The liberation was not a drawn-out siege like Stalingrad. It unfolded rapidly, with bursts of violence, but without total devastation. And then came the image that would define the moment. On August 26th, Charles de Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées. Surrounded by enormous crowds, moving with measured determination, he embodied continuity. France had not ceased to exist. It had endured interruption. In his speech, he declared that Paris had liberated itself, aided by French forces and supported by the Allies. The phrasing reinforced legitimacy. It restored dignity. Militarily, the liberation of Paris did not end the war. German forces remained formidable. The push toward the Rhine and beyond would demand further sacrifice. But politically, the event reshaped France's position in the post-war order. It prevented instability in the capital. It strengthened the provisional government. It ensured that France stood among the victors not merely as territory recovered, but as a nation restored. The decision to liberate Paris was debated, resisted, and risky. It was not part of the original blueprint. It strained logistics and altered priorities. Yet ignoring the city might have produced greater chaos and long-term instability. War rarely offers perfect choices. It offers trade-offs. Paris could have been bypassed. It could have been destroyed under orders from Berlin. It could have descended into factional conflict. None of that happened. Instead, in August 1944, a convergence of military opportunity, political necessity, civilian courage, and individual decisions preserved one of the world's most symbolic capitals. The liberation of Paris was not simply the capture of ground. It was the preservation of identity. It was proof that victory was not measured only in destroyed divisions, but in what survives when the fighting moves on. And perhaps the most striking truth is this: the fate of Paris did not hinge solely on armies. It hinged on timing, pressure, political calculation, and the refusal of one commander to reduce a city to ashes. History often turns not only on power, but on restraint. If you want deeper strategic breakdowns like this, the decisions behind the headlines, the political calculations behind the battles, subscribe now and turn on notifications. See you soon.